Our speaker is Tracy Barrientos. She is a training specialist with the Texas Workforce Commission. I too worked for the Texas Workforce Commission for many decades, Tracy, so I am especially glad to see you here today. And her title of her presentation is intriguing: What a Cactus Taught Me About Prickly Emotions. So we haven't had anybody on at Launchpad talk about emotional intelligence for quite a long time. And so it looks as though this is what that's going to be about. It was my octopus teacher. Those of you who have not seen that documentary, which won an Academy Award, I just watched that a couple of days ago. And so if an octopus can be a teacher, I suppose a cactus can also be a teacher. I'm looking forward to this. Tracy, as I said, is a training specialist with TWC. She works on the human dynamics team, delivering training on professional development and management topics. When I was a trainer at TWC, I did not know about that department. That would have been a fun one for me to apply to as well. She has almost 30 years of experience. How can that be? She doesn't look that old. In education, teaching, and training. Prior to joining Texas Workforce Commission, she was an assistant principal and curriculum instructional coach in Austin. There, she regularly conducted professional development at the campus and district level. She represented the district by representing at South by Southwest EDU on data quality. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics Education and a Master of Education in Educational Leadership from the University of Houston. Let's give a warm welcome to Tracy Barrientos.
Thank you so much. It's awkward when you hear about yourself, but I appreciate Shannon. I appreciate Kathy, both for having me come. As she shared with you, I'm working for TWC. Today, I'm representing myself. I'm not involving this with TWC, but it does give you a background of my training and what I do. And I try to stay on top of everything that has to do with emotional intelligence. That's one of the courses that I teach. And so I came across a TED Talk that I just had to share. And so what I'm sharing with you today, it's based on a TED Talk that I saw that several months ago. I believe Jessica Woods posted this. And when I crossed it, I was like, wow, that's interesting. And so I was able to share it with the group, which connected me with your group. I do want to stop and say this group is absolutely amazing. I have learned so much. I've only been in the room since 10:15, and I had no idea there was such a resource out here, or people that are willing to share and give and do, keep everybody employed. So I will definitely pass this along. So you're in a good spot. So let me tell you a little bit about Jessica. She's a sports and performance psychologist, and which means she gets to work with the top athletes, military professionals, top government agencies, whoever's career sort of depends on safety and peak performance. So she shares this story in her TED Talk about a soldier, and it was back when he was serving in Iraq. And it was in the early 2000s, and the United States had military operations in Iraq, and they would ask the local Iraqis, if you have any information on any kind of safety or issue that could happen, please come forward and share that information about any potential threats. Well, one day, this Iraqi man approaches the US gate to share his story about a possible threat. But instead of being treated as an ally, he was met with hostility by the soldier that was interviewing him. And it was probably likely because days earlier, soldiers from another unit were killed in a surprise attack. And so as the interview continued, so did the soldier's irritation. And as his irritation arose, so did the Iraqis' irritation. And so it just kept getting higher and higher, and the tempers were flaring so high that the interview was cut short. And unfortunately, the following day, there were two separate units that were hit by roadside bombs. Now, of course, we'll never know for sure if the attacks were related because of the interview that was stopped early, or if it would have gone differently if the emotions were under control. But the reason gives us an important example of common problem that helps so many of us performing at our best. So I want to share with you about emotional contagion. How well you're able to regulate your emotions depends on how susceptible you are to a principle called emotional contagion. So I'm thrilled to celebrate 2 years working as a trainer. In July, I hit 2 years, but previously, as Kathy mentioned, I was in education and I was able to teach from 7th grade all the way to seniors. And I was also an administrator, both at the middle school level and the high school level. And I share that information with you for this. I was absolutely susceptible to that emotional contagion. I was able to work with a lot of people in a lot of age groups with a lot of personalities. And so emotional contagion is just like it sounds. It's how quickly you attach the emotions of other people and take them on as your own. And the problem is, though, most of us are highly susceptible to other people's emotions, which means that even the smallest factor can impact how we perform at work or how we perform at home. So raise your hand or either put in chat, and I think Kathy's watching the chat for me, if you've ever been susceptible to emotional contagion. We won't ask you to share stories, but I can imagine that all of us have been affected by emotional contagion. But lucky for us, we can learn how to avoid other people's emotions by being better at regulating our own. Take a look, take a glance at this picture. This looks like a giant teddy bear looking shrub, we think. But Jessica saw one of these on the first time she was hiking in Arizona. And because it looked so soft, she reached out to touch it. But at the time her hand was close enough, the spines and branches jumped on her and pricked her. Literally, her hand was covered. And every time she tried to remove one of those, then it would break off and burrow deeper into her skin, just like this guy in the video. So I want to share a YouTube video so you can see this in action. And so I'm going to share my screen.
Check this out. You know what that is, right? That is a teddy bear, Choya. But let me tell you what it isn't. Cuddly like a teddy bear. All you have to do is get close to this plant and pieces of it will pop off and stick into your skin. I imagine you probably want to see that in action, so ow. Not fun. And then you try to wiggle and get them off and they only get stuck in worse. So I just pop it off with my snake stick. Ready? 1, 2. Oh no! It just broke in half into 2 pieces. Yikes. Oh my gosh. That thing is really wedged into my hand. I knew this was gonna happen. Gosh! Hold on, it's multi-tool time. Probably should have used that in the first place. Teddy bear Choya. Not the cuddly kind of teddy bear that you dream of snuggling up with.
I'm wondering if any of you have seen that before. I had not seen it until I saw the TED Talk. I did not know that such a thing even existed. But every time I watch this video, I kind of get that feeling. Now, this plant has the perfect name. It's called the Jumping Choya, and it left a lasting impression with Jessica, both figuratively and literally. So much so that when she teaches people how to regulate their emotions, she talks about avoiding the jumping choya. Jessica's concluded that jumping choyas are just like people. If you're not careful, they can burrow deeply into your skin. And so first, let's talk about our emotions. To understand this just a little bit better, it's helpful to know how emotions actually affect us. And there's 2 popular theories out there where emotions come from. And the first theory is called cognitive appraisal. And that basically says the experience of an emotion is actually you evaluating if your current situation aligns with your goals and your expectations. So you may not know this about me, but I'm a crafter, like a big time crafter, always doing something. I'm candle making, quilting, knitting, jewelry making. Well, currently I'm into card making. None of these make my husband happy because of the money that I continue to invest, but I'm currently into card making. So I've gone to Hobby Lobby. This happened one evening. I went to Hobby Lobby and all of the paper crafts were half off. So if you're a crafter, you know that's the time to stock up, and it causes great excitement. So I come through the door, I'm about to share my exciting news, and my husband shushes me because he's watching the NFL draft. NFL draft, which goes on for days, and he's recording it. So you can expect that is not how I expected my evening to end, and not to begin when I shared my big news. And that's kind of that cognitive appraisal. It didn't match with my expectation. Now, that other theory is called psychological perception. And that's all about emotions that we subconsciously assign to the physical changes in our body. So you know that I'm a trainer. Usually right before training, most trainers or speakers, they get butterflies in their stomach. Now, I had the same physical feeling last time and I did great. Then I would connect that to excitement or success. I've gotten great scores. It was wonderful. But let's say the last time I had that feeling, I bombed. I had low scores. My ratings weren't good. I got a lot of negative comments. So now I'm going to understand that this butterfly feeling is really nervousness or fear or failure. And so basically we end up overlaying our physiological perception from our past to our current situation. What's interesting about both of these theories is how they play into our emotions and the emotions of other people. Because the part of the brain that processes our emotions and our memory, the limbic system, it's considered to be an open loop system, which means it's influenced by external factors. Let me give you an example. Think about it. Have you ever passed by someone and without saying one word, you could tell how annoyed they were, or you could tell how excited they were? And then maybe you started feeling annoyed, or you might start feeling excited as well. And it's an interesting concept to think about because our brains are hardwired to pick up subtle cues of our environment, which makes it possible for the other person's emotions to jump and attach to you. But what many people don't realize is that every human being is being affected by our open loop system. And so many people that are at work or on the same team can experience the same thing. And so a more cohesive the group is, the stronger the sharing of those moods. And this is for both good moods and when it's not so good. And so all it takes is for one person on the team to express that negative feeling and for the whole group to attach to it. So I want you to think about that. If that's happened to you on your team or even at home, we again won't ask you to share. But Jessica shared a story about that Jumping Choya. So I want you to go back to the Jumping Choya. And I want you to take a moment and think about how long have you held on to an irritation, especially after an encounter with a prickly person? Was it days? Was it weeks? Months? If you don't mind putting in chat, what is the longest time that you've held on to those emotions from a prickly person? If you'll put in chat, either if it were so many days or so many weeks or so many months, if you don't mind sharing, I would love to find out kind of what you're thinking. Kathy, I agree. That's some kind of, Karen has 2 days, a couple of days. Excellent.
Years.
Yeah, thank you for your honesty. Years. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, thank you, Julie. So we have some others that are years. And so Jessica did the same, hours. Kathy, we've got to get some some kind of tips from her on how she does the hours and lets it go. But that's our goal. Charlie has a very good point. He's saying probably days, but when he gets around that person, it comes back. So the gift of being away from them is always helpful, but you're saying that feeling comes back. Ross is mentioning days. Absolutely. So Jessica had this one boss, and she let those negative emotions jump and attach to her, and she held on to them for a year, literally an entire year. And when she thinks about it now, she can't help but cringe because of all the productivity that was lost, the stress that she continued to feel, all because she let her boss catch each other's emotions of frustration, and they couldn't get out of that cycle of that jumping Choya effect. So I teasingly added up all of what you have in chat, and it looks like it's about 89 million days. However, that's just a little bit of humor, but lucky for us, we can learn how to avoid the other people's emotions by becoming better at regulating your own. So the ideal situation, which it improves the team and the group dynamics as well as individual happiness, is for everyone to control their own emotional state and sending back the emotions of the other person right back to them. And says there's really two common regulation strategies that you can use, and both will help. And Jessica uses these with her clients all the time. Do you recall we had the definition of cognitive appraisal, where you assign meaning to a situation based on your goals and your expectations? So that was kind of, if you recall back, that was the story when I found the half off and then my husband didn't meet me with the same excitement. Let's look at this strategy. It's called cognitive reappraisal. And so what you do here is you work to reframe how you interpret the situation in order to regulate your emotions. It's like taking active steps to avoid the jumping Choya when you're hiking. It's you taking that. Let me give you an example. I worked with a colleague and she challenged me at every decision, every turn, every time we had a conversation. To me, that's how I appeared. So I would end up becoming defensive and I would try to justify, and it always affected my behavior. So if I were using the cognitive appraisal strategy, I would actively pause and reframe my interpretation and my expectation, acknowledging that she's not challenging me and I may need to listen and get some feedback. Now, I'm gonna be honest, so training your brain to reframe takes time. And sometimes it's not easy because there's a hint of truth in each of those thoughts. So she probably was challenging me some of those times, but it's up to me to change that. So if you work consistently on the reframing, you'll be able to engage those prickly people without negatively being affected by their mood. And this is again on yourself, and it takes time. And that second emotional regulation is called acceptance. It means exactly what you think. It's learning to accept the moment for what it is and not for what you want it to be. And so when she teaches people to do this, she uses a 3-step framework. Okay, so what? So by saying okay, you halt any more judgment on that person or the situation. And then you allow yourself to accept your physiological responses and your perception of what's happening. And once you've distanced yourself from the thoughts and your emotional state, then you can say, so what? Because you can acknowledge that this was purely just an event. And you transition into now what? It means you've gathered enough information to be able to respond to the event. Okay, let's be real again. Most people are okay with the okay part. Okay, I've got the okay, but then they struggle to get past the so what, because it can be difficult to detach your physiological perception from the situation. If you remember, once you come around that person, just the sight of them, he brought back those memories. So I had that same interaction, but acceptance doesn't mean you're okay with what happened or that you even want it to continue. Means that you're able to take an aerial look at the exchange and understand where those prickly signs are and decide, are they worth attaching to? Ask yourself. But the best part is both of these strategies don't have to be separate practices. Acceptance and cognitive reappraisal can be used interchangeably in order to maintain that emotional self-control. Now, the key to implementing them is to become self-aware when you become emotionally triggered. If another person triggers you, an event triggers you, you're self-aware about it. And once you consciously become aware of either your thoughts, maybe your emotions, those physical sensations we might feel, well, then you can choose to practice either of the techniques. These may be common concepts. We've heard them all before, especially the okay, now what, so what. But I'll tell you, definitely they're not commonly practiced. So by remembering it with the Jumping Choya in mind, it'll help you to be more self-aware, more self-regulated, and you'll avoid being pricked. Thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions or any thoughts that you have. Thank you, Charlie. Any questions?
Tracy, do you remember transactional analysis?
Yes.
So I used to, when I first learned about transactional analysis, I just loved it, and I could analyze interactions and say, oh yeah, this was supposed to be an adult exchange, and it became a parent-child exchange, and that's why this person, flew off the handle and got weird. Can you explain how your approach sort of is related to transactional analysis, or how those two inform each other, if you think they do?
Absolutely. One piece that you shared is about that stepping back and analyzing the situation. So our goal is what happens when it happens again, because obviously if we're in this situation, we've gotten triggered and we've gone down a path that we don't want to go again. And so when you're talking about analyzing that situation, finding where I am in the situation, where they are, and then what roles will I take next time, the self-awareness piece is huge. And sometimes it's hard because it's like, gosh, it's always on me, and I would love it to be on the other person. However, when you start with your self-awareness and then you start seeing how you're interacting with others, you're finding out, what are my emotions? I know when I'm triggered, Kathy, sometimes I can tell I get warm. And so I know that's a trigger, like I'm about to not blow, but I'm about to enter into an action that I probably don't want to. My suggestion is take some time, step back. Once you've started that regulation and you realize what your triggers are, you'll take some time to step back. I do some water drinking tips. I might be in a meeting, I can feel myself, here we go. I just take a drink, and counting to 10 without like 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, honestly, it's counting and drinking and pulling yourself back to a situation where you can handle it. And so for many of us, we can, like the person that's in the 2-hour range, I imagine that's with some practice, but I don't think that's an unreachable goal for people. I can't say that there aren't people that will trigger you regardless, because of the interaction that is well beyond your self-awareness, your social awareness, your emotional intelligence. But for most interactions, you can reset. And the reason I encourage resetting is because I'm going to have to work with or live with these people for quite some time. And so I want to find a way that we can do this together and do it well. So that when you're talking about that, appraising the situation, you want to, after it's happened, kind of walk through and ask yourself, what are the pieces that I can know next time to avoid that? Randy brings up something to keep in mind dealing with people. People are difficult and like to push those buttons. And you're absolutely right. And that's one of the areas I said that we will encounter people that regardless of our emotional intelligence level, they are going to push those buttons. The thing I try to share with people is Know exactly why or how they're pushing your buttons. Drill it all the way down, not just to the way they look is pushing buttons for me, but is it how they're treating me? Is it their actions? Is it what is it that's causing those button pushing? And then you can start moving into, is this something I can take on? Because unfortunately, you're right. And we deal with people all the time. You guys have mentioned a lot of jobs that everybody's looking. I just have never gotten to work with one where you don't interact with people and people bring things with them. But it's more about, how do I interact with the relationship so that it's both a win-win? So once I take care of myself, then I can start working on others. But you're right, that button pushing is something else. Right, here's I've got a direct message. Excellent. So sometimes, and this is true, like I'm information about people that are button pushers. And like I said, when you get that person that you realize they are not going to find a meeting place, then sometimes you have to make some choices. And if it's at work, that's difficult. If it's your boss, that's really difficult. But you can minimize interactions. I mean, I've worked on teams where I've worked with people that perhaps they push my buttons for different reasons, and I limit my interaction. And that's what someone has shared with me, limiting your interactions as much as you can. You cannot go to work and say, well, I'm not talking to Susie for, 2 months because, yes, just my buttons. We can't do that, but you can, as much as you can, limit those interactions. And if it's a relationship that you don't have to be in, you can certainly remove them from that circle of friends or remove yourself. So those are some options that sometimes we have to get to. Our goal, though, is that we continue to learn. And the unfortunate thing is, once that person is removed, another one may come along. And so that's part of that appraising our situations. What can I do to not have to experience this again? And what am I willing to work with someone else? Which is part of our social awareness and our relationship management. It's about how we relate to others in our situations. And when it's relationship management, you're not managing other people, but how are you building relationship with others so that we are all growing and we're all successful in that? And that takes time, that takes practice, and we start with self. These are great conversations. Kathy, did you want to add any more?
Well, I have another question.
Yes.
If you know you're having an issue with someone, I know that the grown-up thing to do is to invite a conversation, whatever you say, whatever. We don't seem to be eye to eye on this. Can we talk about it, or what is it exactly that is bothering you? That initial reaching out about trying to discuss what's between you, I have always found that to be really difficult to do, and some people seem to be able to do it effortlessly. And do you think that is a good idea? Is it better to just work on yourself and reframe and work on your own attitude and figure out how to deal with it?
I'm going to give you I'm going to give you both. Both
Okay.
are correct. I'm definitely, let's put this on the table. But it depends on the relationship with that person. If I've, known them 2 weeks, it might be easy to say, hey, kind of when you say this is how I feel. So having those conversations is great. Having them when it's not in the middle of the interaction is so much better. And just having it as a conversation. In the I statements, of course. And if the better the relationship you have with the person, I think the more important it is for you to have the conversation and then that trust build. So when you're trusted by that person, when you feel respected by that person, and you realize we are going to work together and this is going to be okay, you can have some more of those truth conversations. But the self-awareness of being on the island of me and letting everybody else have their emotions. I don't advocate that either, but it is check me first, see if there's something in me that's easily, like some people, it's like easily, I can just not have to worry about that or not bring that up. But when it's part of who you are, you have to be honest about that and then kind of create that common ground. But that truthfully takes relationship. And so it's not, you just can't meet someone right away and then say, okay, this is my list of self-aware behaviors that if you can just make all these happen, then great. That doesn't necessarily work. But knowing yourself and knowing, okay, that is going to bother me. I'll give you an example. A really good friend of mine did something that pushed my buttons. It was a comment that she would make that insinuated something about my character. And she did it in a joking manner. She did it once. I was like, okay. She did it twice. I was like, oh, okay. But by time 5, I was 10 inside. And so because of our relationship, I was like, I need to tell you how this makes me feel when you say that. And she had no idea. So for some people, it's no idea. For other people, it's like, good, because that's exactly how I wanted you to feel. And so there are purposeful button pushers, but there's also unaware button pushers. And sometimes when it opens that conversation, I think the good part is, hey, while the door is open, why don't we talk about, is there anything else of why you feel that way? And it also helps you dig back to maybe what causes you to feel that way with that particular person, or what could I do moving forward? So I think both are valid, but I really don't advocate for you to be the emotional punching bag of self-awareness. It's really being conscious of how I'm reacting to other people. Like when a button is pushed, how is my reaction? Like sometimes that self-awareness of, oh, I handled that calm and coolly, but really I was yelling and my arms were flapping. It's really understanding, okay, this is how I am being received by other people. And what can I do to work on that? Hope that sort of answered your question.
Yeah, that's good. Cedar says with typical people, conversations could work. With narcissists in the workplace, it's best to just avoid them and not feed them.
Didn't want to call them out by name, but that personalities, that is harder to work around. And when you talk about self-awareness, about 1/3 of everybody that is taking the emotional awareness, the emotional intelligence, there's a self-assessment. About 1/3 of us are actually rate ourselves high in self-awareness, are aware of how we're impacting others. So that means that kind of 2/3 of us are just kind of out there thinking that we are self-aware, and we're not necessarily self-aware. So when you put narcissist, and I'm not calling people by name, and not in some situations, everybody has a little bit of piece of that. But when you're in that situation, you're not self-aware to even know that you're in that situation and you're causing people to feel that way. And I've had both good and bad results from having conversations with people that were kind of in that situation. And sometimes it's like, oh my goodness, I had no idea I was coming off that way. Or, oh my goodness, that's the 4th person that's told me that. I really need to think about it. And then I've had other people that have said, no, I'm not. So you're right. It really depends, and people are individuals. So my suggestion, treat people individually. And so if you come across someone, take their situation as unique and work with them unique, instead of kind of, I met someone like you, and this is how this is going to go. That's not always. And the receptiveness of people's it varies. I'll be honest, it varies.
We used to just uncover some of those strange reactions sometimes when we did mock interviews. For example, we had one man who had grown up in a very abusive family. And he was, as the oldest child, male child, he felt as though he was defending his mother and sisters and siblings from this abusive father figure. And he eventually went into social work and specializing in that same situation, providing that assistance. But it was so interesting in mock interviews, he wasn't getting interviewed. And he was just such a nice, gentle guy. But in mock interviews, you could just see him react to the power the delta between him and the interviewer. And he would get angry and offensive and defensive. And I said, this isn't who you are, but here's how you're coming across. You know, you're looking at the interviewer who is between you and the job as your enemy, and you're coming across as combative and argumentative, and it's in his body language. I mean, he left that whole career field where he was very passionate about it, and he left the career field because he could not control his emotional intelligence. He could not control the reactions that he had to that situation. And Karen said, I tried having the adult conversation with a button pusher at one of my jobs. That didn't work. Just knowing what was going on helped me deal with it most of the time. The times that didn't work, I avoided the person as much as possible.
That's a good move, Karen. Thank you so much for all of what you're bringing. Kathy, just one thing about that gentleman reminds me that you have triggers. Everybody's going to have triggers. And so if you can imagine, you're putting us all in this fishbowl and everybody is being triggered, which is why that understanding of others is so important in stopping with that empathy to understand where people are coming from. Obviously, with your gentleman to remove himself, but until you can confront it, like if that mock interview had been recorded and he can kind of see himself responding in that manner, then perhaps you don't, because when we're reacting, we're just being ourselves. We can't see ourselves. And so, and we also don't know our audience. For other people, that might be, wow, we need someone strong in this position that can stand up to, you know, some of our investors that we need to get what we need, but in a different area, not so much. And that's just lifelong process. It doesn't, once you take a self-intelligence course and you work on yourself or your emotional intelligence, it doesn't stop, because you're going to be in a different situation. Very different for me when I was a teacher than when I became an administrator. I had to go back to my emotional intelligence because my group of influence was very different. Now I'm dealing with district, and I'm dealing with parents, and I'm dealing with students on a different level. And then I come to TWC, and then it's a different aspect where you are interacting with different people. So it's ongoing, and it's a lot of self-reflection. And then it's the social interaction and how I build relationships is just as important. And then knowing when to walk away. And Karen has given us a good tip, like you do your best. And sometimes it may go well. Sometimes the timing of when you have the conversation, the emotion around the conversation, the importance of the conversation, all are going to play into that. So sometimes you're successful, and other times it's like a crash and burn. And so it's like back to square one or minimize. Like she said, I like that.